All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking to you today. It's Monday. We've got the thought leader, a political pundit, not just a plain old pundit, but an actual political pundit, Arlen Grossman with us. Arlen, you caught me. I don't think I've had it say political pundit. I think you may be mistaken there.
That's my recollection. It said political pundit, but I can live with either one.
All right, I wonder why we're getting that feedback. I apologize, folks, just a little bit from Arlen, and he's not too loud. There's always something wrong, Arlen. It drives me friggin' crazy.
I've noticed that, yes.
Yeah, you have. You have noticed that. So Arlen gave me, as he always does, or recommended some excellent stories, topics to discuss, but I kind of overruled you. Not that we're not going to get to yours. I promise we will, and I do not want to spend the whole program, Arlen, on the college conflicts, the campuses that are really at a boil. But I just don't feel it would be responsible for me not to at least discuss it with you for a few minutes, especially because I've been so focused on this topic over the past few weeks.
It's a big one.
It really is. So I've got that screen. It's not a screenshot, but the promo slide I put together. Can we all just get along? And of course, I'm referencing Rodney King back in the LA riots, I think around 1989. Were you in Los Angeles at that time? And did I get the year? I think that's the correct year.
Yeah, I was. I remember it well.
What was it like?
There was a lot of tension, especially, people were looking over to, Watts and the black communities and see how they would react. And I guess there was some, turmoil.
Well, Rodney King made that statement, I believe, after he had been beaten by police, and he was a voice of peace, right? I mean, that was his voice. I'm going to ask you just flat out, is this conflict right now that is erupting in college campuses, secondary, of course, to the Gaza-Israel, I don't even like to use the word war, but what the slaughter of Gazans by Israel, of course, I'm giving away my position of what's happening. Can we address this issue without the violence that we're seeing on our TV sets?
I was telling you before, I definitely have mixed feelings about all this. I mean, when I started college in 1967, we just started the protests against the Vietnam War, and it got pretty heated, and I certainly participated in that, as did many others, and it was exciting. So here we are, fast forward to 2024, and there's more of that, college campuses erupting against the government and their policies. So, I think what we did when I was, in the anti-Vietnam protests, I think was a good thing. And I think I would agree that this needs to be addressed also. And I'm glad, students are paying attention to this and giving it their, attention and everything. It's not all perfect, obviously. There are some problems that go along with it. You have the issue of Jews and Israel and all that, which complicates things, I think. So there's a lot of differences. I see a lot of liberals uncomfortable with these kind of protests, and that's kind of unusual.
All right. Well, you're watching Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. I do hope you'll subscribe. We've got Arlen with us. It's an Arlen Monday. Arlen, of course, the thought leader, a pundit. I'm going to just call you a pundit because you're not just a political pundit. After all, the big picture, the quotation quotient, which really brought you fame and fortune, is not political. It's not politicized, Arlen.
Not at all.
So we can sort of say you're a kind of a general purpose pundit as opposed to simply a political one. All right, enough with the humor. Arlen is not laughing. He is not finding this funny. By the way, I don't know if you can see it. You may be able, you can't right now, but I've got a little camera over my right shoulder. I'm actually taking pictures of me and you doing this program, Arlen, because I'm doing career day this Friday. I'm going to my wife's school. I'm going to be talking to the third, maybe fifth graders about my career as a YouTuber live streamer. We figured the kids, that's probably something the kids will actually be interested in, and I'm going to try to make it interactive. But it's hard to call it a career. Sadly, it's more like I don't want to say a hobby exactly, but more just, you got a word for me, Mr. Quotation Quotient? What would you call it?
Your
A vanity
activity.
project. Here you go. A vanity project.
Okay.
All right. So I want to play a clip. We're not going to spend the whole time on college campuses, but I do want to play this video, Arlen, if I can, because I think they did a real nice job on ABC. Now, it wasn't perfect. I'm very critical. I'm harshly critical of the media a lot, but I try to be fair. So when they do something I like, or I think they cover a story pretty well, I'm going to try to let you know that as well. Not all of this is perfect, but you mentioned the Jewish question, the anti-Semitism. So this is part of this video, but let's just start it right here. Let me get to this, and it's going to take just a moment as I've got to get my video up here of the, and of course, colleges. Here we go.
Across the nation and around the clock. From California to Michigan and along the East Coast, college campuses erupting in protest.
Let them go!
Pro-Palestinian demonstrators demanding action, refusing to back down.
No more money for Israel's crime! Like this! We will not stop! We will not rest!
As a string of outsiders try to join the conversation, tonight we hear from the students themselves.
Let me see if I can pause that. Of course, I'm not able to.
We're at Columbia University.
I'm just going to pause it real quick because where I really wanted to pause it was at right when Mike, what's his name, Johnson was getting booed, because I figured you'd applaud that part of it.
Right, you're right.
He was going to campuses to condemn the protesters. The pro-Palestine protesters did not go over very well with that group. You mentioned the Vietnam War protests. Where do you see dissimilarities? You mentioned the religious component. Do you think there's a moral, do you think one side has the moral upper hand versus the other? In other words, were the peace protesters in the 1960s, were they more morally correct than the anti-Israel protesters today, or do you not make that judgment?
Well, I think it's pretty clear cut back then. It was easy to take the side of the students, and there was not much you could say positively about what the government was doing overseas in Vietnam. I think this is a little bit complicated because what we're seeing today, because I see a lot of liberals not too happy with the protests, which is odd. I mean, I'm glad to see students getting involved. I think that's terrific. But, there have been instances of, problems with anti-Semitism and, so it's a little more complicated today. So not exactly as clear cut, I don't think, as it was in the Vietnam days.
Do you think, though, the argument to be made by the protesters, and I actually embrace this argument, is we're supporting something that's just truly wrong. It's just simply morally wrong what Israel is doing in Gaza, and we shouldn't be supporting it. The questions in Vietnam, you might argue, and I would argue, they're a little more like what's happening in Ukraine. You did see encroachment into a sort of democratic country, Vietnam or South Vietnam, by the Chinese communists or the Viet Minh or the Viet Cong or whatever you want to call them, who were backed by the Chinese and the Russians, perhaps to a degree. And they were invading a different country. We were supporting that country. So could you make the argument that in a way today's protesters are even more corrected? There's less nuance here.
I think a big issue for me, at least, is what is Joe Biden doing? He is supposed to be a peaceful person who wants to, help, and certainly is against what's going on. And says he's against what's going on as far as the what Israel is doing to the people of Gaza, but yet he doesn't take any actions. He says words, but he doesn't take the actions of, stopping the money and stopping the offensive weapons being given to Israel. So that to me certainly needs to be protested. I don't know why he's doing what he's doing.
Well, it seems like the protesters on the college campuses are focused on what their universities are doing. In other words, they're demanding that the universities divest from any stocks that invest in Israel, that have any holdings in Israel, divest from any military contractors. This seems to me to leverage their place at a university or college with the actual conflict. I can't see any. I have no moral problem with that. Arlen, I did say to you we would keep it relatively brief, and I want to promise, I promised you I would do that. You brought up, though, and I want to focus on this really, because you are Jewish American, the question of anti-Semitism. Is there anti-Semitism here? Let me play just a little bit more from the video, because I thought I don't love everything they said, but, maybe that means that they did a good job, because there's stuff I did like and stuff I didn't from ABC. Did you see this report? It's Nightline. I guess that's like, what is that? Is that like their 60 Minutes, Arlen?
I'm not familiar. I didn't see it. I don't know.
Do you know that show, Nightline? Are you familiar with that at all? Or you don't?
Well, it's been on it was on years ago.
Forever, right?
Yeah.
Well, here we go. Let's go to this student protester. We're going to hear from two Jewish students, and then there's going to be a discussion of an event that occurred that was, according to the ABC report, it's considered to be anti-Semitic. I want your take on that as well. But let's play the video, and we'll get the audio up as well.
It was a scary moment when the riot cops are coming into your college campus and putting you in zip ties. But I think that I knew these risks. I knew that was the risk of the action I was taking.
Sarah was later suspended and lost access to campus, classes, and her dorm. But she says she has no regrets.
What I was taught as a Jew growing up is completely against the actions that you're seeing in Gaza at the hands of the IDF. You're seeing hospitals being destroyed, and that's just completely against everything I was taught, the value of human life as a Jewish person.
Soon after those arrests, the encampment came back stronger.
All right, so let me stop it, Arlen, real quick. Couple of points. So Sarah Boris there identifies as Jewish. She was a pro-Palestine protester against Israel. Does that impact on your view that there's anti-Semitism, that your fear, let me not say it's your view, your fear that the protests are to a degree anti-Semitic?
Well, I'm very sympathetic to her. My son, who was at some Berkeley demonstrations recently, says, "Oh, it's just the media that's promoting this anti-Semitism. There's really not much of it, and there's a lot of Jewish people obviously supporting the demonstrations." And I agree with that. Yet I heard this morning that Joe Scarborough was talking about he knew somebody who their parents wouldn't let their child date a person because he was Jewish. So I tend to think that it's overdone, the anti-Semitism, and I think maybe it's just exaggerated. So I'm basically in support of these demonstrations. I would probably be doing them also. Wow.
Well, good for you. I feel like I should be doing them, Arlen. Let me play just a little more. I promise we're going to get to your stories. I'm not going to kill. Okay. I'm not going to flog these. And by the way, this is a safe space for you to disagree with me. I will not push back aggressively. I may challenge or argue a little bit, but there'll be nothing personal. I'm really committed to that. And in fact, I want to get to something the president of Wesleyan University but said or wrote that I like. But before we get there, I just real quick see if I'm gonna make sure this is paused, but I want to just see if I can get to the story where they describe, which by the way, I want to just say you're gonna see me skimming through, skip there. This is the story right here. That's a Jewish student, pro-Israeli student. But let's get to the part right here where the narrator recounts what he calls an anti-Semitic event.
We're interpreting it wrong.
Back in January, Columbia student protester Kaimani James live-streamed anti-Semitic comments.
Be grateful that I'm not just going out and murdering Zionists.
Today, university officials announced.
So now he subsequently apologized for that statement. Be thankful I'm not out there murdering Zionists. I'll be real clear. I think it's ugly. I don't like it. I think it's wrong. I cannot say that is clearly, definitively anti-Semitic in my view.
Sure sounded like it to me, but okay.
Well, but there are Zionists who aren't Jewish, and there are Jews who aren't Zionists.
That is true. You know, it shouldn't be about Jews and Zionists and all that. It should be about the Israeli government and the American government. And I hate to see all these other things coming into play, which I think are just distracting us from the real issues, which are, you know, what Israel is doing, what Netanyahu is doing, and how Biden should be doing more to prevent it.
Arlen, I want to get, as I mentioned, the question, can we all get along? So here is, I'm just going to put the whole, well, it's not the whole letter, but I'm going to just take up the whole screen with part of a letter that was shared with me and other alums of my august college, Wesleyan University, which Coach used to point out I bragged about 3 times a day sometimes or more, having been a West grad. And I argued with him and said, it's not true. I don't talk about it all the time. We played a clip, and probably 10 minutes I must have mentioned Wesleyan about 8 times. So he shut me up good, Arlen. So at Wesleyan, you get this came this morning. So that's this morning, today, Monday morning. You can find pro-Palestinian protesters camped out behind North College. North College is the administrative office at Wesleyan. The students there know that they are in violation of university rules, much as the students at Columbia and other schools are violating rules, and some have been arrested. Some have been violently arrested, and I hope to talk to a woman who was violently arrested at Wash University in St. Louis tomorrow. But the president notes they are willing to accept the consequences. The protest has been non-violent. And he goes on to say the university will not tolerate intimidation or harassment of any kind. He says the protesters assure us they have no intention of engaging in any violence. And then he continues to say, we must all reject violence. If we do, we have opportunities to listen and to learn from each other. He kind of gives the back of his hand to the chanting and drumming. I don't like that. I think there's something to be said for the chanting and drumming, kind of bringing people together. But then he knows it can happen. In other words, people can learn from each other during the planned discussion sessions and deep conversations that will take place throughout the week. I guess Wesleyan is going to try to convene with mediators and, professional conflict resolution folks, a discussion among the pro and anti-Israel folks. So, Arlen, what's your reaction to all of that, first of all?
Well, violence is never good. Anti-Semitism is never good. I think it's terrific that students are getting involved in what's happening around the world, because I've been wondering the last decade or two whether they really are getting involved, whether they're paying enough attention in it. And apparently many of them are today. So that part is good. I think just the involvement of the students, whether they're doing it the proper way, that's another issue. And I'm sure there's both sides.
Do you like the fact that the president is pushing the students to talk to each other? He's demanding, insisting on nonviolence, but also saying we have to listen to each other. And I'm going to throw a lot out there, Arlen. He's not calling out the dogs. He's not calling the police, the Middletown police, to come and roust out the protesters, even though he says they're breaking the rules.
Yeah, I suspect Wesleyan is not having as much trouble as some other campuses, but no, he sounds like he's handling it well. If he's trying to get people together to talk, that's a good thing. If he's not bringing in the authorities. I think that's a good thing too. So it sounds like they have pretty good leadership at Wesleyan right now.
Well, the point was made that at Columbia, when the police were brought in, that only solidified the determination of the protesters to come back and to occupy the quad. So it would seem to be the, prudent course as well. If your goal is to avoid, bad publicity, and if you really want to keep the campus free of protests, that's going to be a losing game, apparently. So it seems to me this is the right way to go. Personally, where I was really going with this, Arlen, is I love the idea of trying to get the students on both sides to talk to each other. Do you think there's any way either side will listen to the other?
Well, of course, that's a major problem overall in this country, that we're so divided now. I was just talking to my neighbor who went to see the movie Civil War, which is about the country basically being divided and fighting, within the country. And these are things that are getting worse these days, that have been getting worse. And it's not a good thing. And we don't seem to be able to get together and agree on a whole lot of things right now. And there's just so much, division, and one side is completely sees it one way, the other side sees it completely the other way. We definitely need to find a way to get together and discuss things and come to some common grounds. I think that's really important.
Arlen, you mentioned the Civil War. It's funny. I was thinking of the Civil War today in this exact context. That was a disagreement, a moral, spiritual disagreement about a crisis we were facing as a country that it appears, could not have been resolved peaceably. At least there could not have been justice peaceably brought. Justice meaning liberation of the slaves, the enslaved people, which, I guess we would say is still in a sense incomplete. But the first and most important step, the critical step, ending slavery, did take a war that left more Americans dead than have been killed in every other conflict before or since.
Yes, that is true. And just to make clear, I was talking about a movie that's out right now called Civil War, and it's talking about modern times, and if the country was divided, how we would react. I haven't seen the movie, but I understand it. It sounds uncomfortable to me, like a little bit too close to home, too real.
Yeah, but I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, may you live in interesting times. These are the times we live in, whether we like it or not. I'm going to just give that subscribe button another click so it doesn't cut anything off. Still learning the OBS studio. I was watching another live streamer that I often watch, chess videos, not politics, but chess. And he was describing some of the challenges he was facing with the layers, because we use layers. For example, where you see Arlen Grossman, pundit thought leader, that's a layer. That's a little rectangular layer that I've layered on top of your image, Arlen. So this is also by the way, if I show during my career day to explain to my kids, the kids I'm going to be teaching.
Hey, Hal, don't be too tough on yourself. You've only been doing this every day for about a year. You can't be expected to get it right every time.
Yeah, of course not. Are you kidding me? These programs are so complicated. Nobody really understands them. I don't think Bill Gates understands Windows. I'll be real frank with you. I'm sure there's so many aspects of it that he has no idea what's going on. So
I will give you credit, though. You do a good job of the visual things that you put on the on the screen, and I'm impressed.
Have you got like 20 or 30 live streamers together, Arlen? I'm sure you'd find one who's no better than I am. All right, let's get. If you took you a little while to figure that one out, that was a pretty self-deprecating joke. Let's move on. You gave some other stories, and you wanted to know about sports betting. You brought that to my attention last week. I was so interested in that story, which I've often talked about gambling and the pathologies I see as associated with it. But I talked about it without you, Arlen, but you wanted to kind of just come back to it a little bit. You watched my video, the discussion I had of it, and you had a few other thoughts you wanted to throw on top of the pile.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of a surprise. I didn't, I never thought of this issue for a long time. I mean, it seems like it has not been an issue, but now it's coming into the news. You've had a professional basketball player who was suspended for life for betting against his team. And I guess one of the main things coming out is that the way the bets are, they're I forget the word for it, but they're individualized, and so will one player score so many points and all that, and those things. It's just the thought that sports might not be totally up and honest is very distressing, because you want to make sure that it's all real and it's all honest, and the winner is the one who's best and the loser is the worst. And but when you have the complication of gambling, which apparently is very important to sports these days, then things get very complicated.
Yeah, you're talking about the prop bets in particular, Arlen, the proposition bets where, you gamble on whether a player's going to catch 4 passes, whether, role player's going to score 8 points off the bench. I mean, you can bet on just about any prop, and obviously those are so much easier for an individual to manipulate. If you're a wide receiver and you bet against yourself to catch 4 passes, you just sort of mishandle, you bobble the 3rd pass or the 4th pass and you don't catch it. You miss a couple of shots when you're going to score a basket if you bet against yourself. And concurrently, you might bet on yourself, but then there's problems there too, because you might say, well, I got to score more, I got to shoot more. And again, you hurt your team's chances to win. So these are very problematic. You mentioned that you weren't aware of the scope of the problem. I think it's gotten much worse because of the sports apps that we see, all the advertising now by gambling interest. Casinos are now much more widespread than they used to be. We see more and more of them popping up. So these are all serious problems that have worsened the cancer that is casino gambling, in my opinion.
Yeah, it all boils down to money, doesn't it? Who's making money, who isn't, who's making profits, who isn't. To me, sports was always an escape, that you wouldn't have the same kind of problems you have in other areas of the country. But now it's not so clear. What I've always thought were, honest escapism is now questioned. And you have to wonder, is what's going on, is what you see totally honest? And that's a bad place to be.
That was exactly my question, right? Is it fake, right? That was the question I asked earlier or last week. Arlen, you remember, I'm sure, you may not remember what you had for breakfast, but I'm sure you remember the old KGO with all those hosts, Gene Burns and, all those folks, Ron, I forget his last name. Billy Sunshine was a regular caller for them.
Sure.
They took off those hosts, and I think that station now, maybe it's changed again, is like a gambling station, right? It's all about sports betting.
Yeah, that's what I remember them saying. Once they took off all the talk show people, apparently they can make a lot more money, talking about gambling and betting, and it's very sad.
It's terrible. And that was, and that's with a smaller audience. The audience for KGO was very, very large. They were the most successful, I believe, all-talk radio station in the country. It was very interesting, too, because they were not a conservative talker like most, except for the old KRXA 540 and a few other exceptions to that rule. But it's very expensive. Obviously, you have to pay all the hosts, and so that's much more expensive. Then they just syndicate these shows with fantasy football shows and the like. And they have a smaller audience, but it costs them far less money, and they get tons of advertising from the gambling interest. I think it's terrible.
Just as an aside, there's one former KGO talk show host named Mark Thompson, who has gone to podcast and seems to be doing pretty well. My wife listens to him every day, and it's a good show. And so at least, some of those talkers are still out there, and I'm happy to have that. But KGO was it was a terrific station to go to when you wanted to, hear political talk. And I'm sorry to see that it's not no longer the same.
Well, it was unique in my experience, Arlen, also because it really didn't hew to either left or right. As I mentioned, almost all political talk stations 20 years ago when I started KRXA were right wing, with a very small number of progressive stations. KGO was that rare beast that really was neither.
There was one other station in Los Angeles, KBC, and interestingly enough, our friend Carl Siegman worked on that station, and they had a great lineup of talk show hosts, often different points of view, and some big names. And so they were the equivalent, I think, of KGO down south in Los Angeles. That was a good station too, but it didn't last.
We didn't have them. I'm not ever aware of those on the East Coast, whether in New York or Washington, D.C., which would be the two East Coast markets with which I have familiarity. There were no non-hyper partisan stations, which is, again, I think it's unfortunate because people rarely go out of their comfort zone. If you're conservative, you're not listening to progressives. And frankly, if you're progressive, you're not going to listen to conservatives. So a station like KGO or the old KABC in LA, the good thing is you might hear some views that, and some facts that contradict your belief system. And maybe, just maybe, we get some dialogue to solve our problems that isn't just pointing fingers and blaming the other side. The thing I would say, I guess NPR maybe fills that role, but they have a very distinct political perspective as well. So they're not unique either. They're maybe unique, but they're not nonpartisan, really.
I'll tell you one thing that I think it's very disturbing to me is I think when Rush Limbaugh was on the air and so many people were listening to him, I think the country changed. That's one of the, I think, beginnings of where we separated. He just went after the other side so harshly and violently, and it got people very upset. And I think things have gone downhill since then, thanks to what he was talking about.
I think he was one of the most negative, most dangerous and destructive figures in our country, certainly in the past 50 years. No question, Arlen. This is from the New York Times. We'll move on from gambling, but I just wanted to get this headline up more. Not so much, well, you mentioned it, the NBA player, I don't think a great player, Jonte Porter, who was banned, but I just had to flag this headline because to me it's really emblematic of the New York Times. I don't know how I would even describe it, but a practice some worry could become more prevalent. Who doesn't worry? Who doesn't worry that it's going to become more prevalent? It's so understated. It's like a joke almost. Of course, we all are worried it's going to become more prevalent, and it is becoming more prevalent, Arlen.
There's so much to worry about these days, and that's one of them.
But I just think the way do you see what I'm saying? That sub headline is just, it understates to such a laughable degree the real problem. It is a real problem, and it is becoming more prevalent. And I wish they could be a little more forthright. That's my view on it. Arlen, I want to move on to our next topic, unless you have something else to say about gambling. This is going to be another one you mentioned. We've got two more Arlen topics. We've got devices, tech, and we've also got the Supreme Court case on Trump's immunity, and none other than Liz Cheney, former first, I guess, second daughter, right? What do you call the Veep's first lady, second lady? I don't know. What do you call it?
Daughter is the best I can do.
The former Veep's daughter. She wasn't a first daughter, obviously. Although some might say she really was. I don't know. But do you have anything else on gambling, or can we go on to devices? I'm happy to talk about the gambling, but we can also move on.
Let's move on.
This story you brought to my attention. This is actually a book review of a book, a nonfiction by I don't know if you know much about Jonathan Haidt, Arlen. He is a professor, I believe, of psychiatry. I could be wrong about that, at the University of Virginia. He wrote the book In the Anxious Generation. He's more of a, I would say, a conservative, even certainly conservative leaning psychiatrist. He is not one of these feel good, if it feels good, do it. Oh, you're okay, I'm okay kind of people. He is holds people responsible pretty much for their own problems, doesn't make excuses for them. Sometimes I think that's good. Other times I have a real problem with that. So that's Jonathan Haidt. Why did this book review grab your attention?
I just seeing this problem, and it just makes so much sense what it's doing to our younger generation. The fact that, kids are running around, communicating with their phones and doing everything on their phones and interacting personally much less. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of problems with the younger generation as far as depression and drug use. And there's problems being a kid today. And a lot of it could be focused backwards on the fact that we have these smartphones and everything is so technologically hyper today. I think there's a connection.
I don't disagree. I think kids need, first and foremost, and I think what I'd have preferred just from reading this op-ed, Arlen, is more a focus on what we should have for kids, what we aren't providing children, rather than what they are getting now that's bad. I like to see much more recreation places, parks, after school centers, outdoor activities, safe places for kids to hang out. I think that it's easy to say, oh, these phones are really bad, but until you have a vision for something else that's better, I don't know how far you're going to get.
Well, what was interesting to me is somebody pointed out that a lot of these problems that young people are having today escalated around the year 2010. And that happened to be the same time that these smartphones came about. And, rather than just the flip phones, the smartphones where you could get everything and do everything with them, that was happening at the same time. And there may be a connection, I think, that young people are just focused on technology and their phones, their social media, and less on each other and the normal things like that you and me grew up with. So I think there is definitely a connection there. It makes sense to me.
Well, I put up that particular segment of the article where Haidt focuses on apparently a little bit of a jump in the incidence of mental illness and distress. I'm presuming for kids. Of course, adolescence is always a difficult time. There's always been adolescent angst. It's not as though this is something new. It's just one more factor that may or may not harm our children. I'm of the mindset that, as you are, that it's probably on net a negative. I share that view, Arlen. But again, I would like to see a focus on what kids aren't getting today that maybe they were getting 50, 60 years ago in terms of safe places to hang out, kid-centric places, gyms, rec centers, fields. We just don't have kid-centric, non-commercial spaces for children. And I think that, to me, is the bigger problem.
That's been going on for forever. People talk about that, and there should be more of what you're talking about. But I think also another issue is the fact that that schools allow phones to be used on, in the school, and I think that's certainly a bad thing. If they were banned, that would make more sense to me than to allow, so much.
I'd like to see that as well, but the problem then is kids are going to say, well, my parent, needs to let me know what time I have to get home. I mean, there's all sorts of other, we get that this is how we communicate, right? I mean, that's sort of the times change. I mean, we do live in a different time. There's no question about it.
There can be rules, there can be laws that, prevent phones being used in school, which, as you and me obviously went through school that way without all the phones and all those distractions.
Well, nobody had phones. I mean, that would be like saying, Abe Lincoln went to school without a school bus. I mean, of course, you have to make concessions, I think, to modernity. How many, how much, the whole, then that all is an issue. I certainly think phones should be off. Maybe you give kids a 15 minutes. This is the response in the Times Review. And I thought it was I appreciated this. It's worth considering the failure of prior absolutist stance. I don't know if it's absolutist to say no phones in school. You can say no phones anywhere is absolutist. No phones in school is strong, but non-absolutist. I'd like to read more details. To me, that it might make sense. But as you can see from this section, the reviewer at least is skeptical of Haight's moral certainty.
Of course, he notes that Nancy Reagan's just say no drug campaign didn't work very well. But of course, that's Nancy Reagan. Couldn't expect young people to really pay attention to Nancy Reagan. So that's not realistic.
So should you and I be the face of the no cell phones in schools movement, Arlen? Do you think that they'd listen to us more than to Nancy, the First Lady?
Well, look at that. Look at it this way. You talked about Abraham Lincoln. He did very well. He was a great man, and he didn't have a cell phone. So
no, he didn't. No. I think this is look. All kidding aside, I sometimes go to my to help my mother-in-law who lives in a nursing home now. So I'll sit with her to help her with her meal when my wife isn't available to do that. And you see some of those seniors, they're taking out their phones when the meal's late, when, it's not just kids, right? I mean, instead of talking to each other, you have these 90-year-olds, and I'm not exaggerating, right? I could say that you have the 123-year-olds. That would be exaggerating. No, you have octogenarians, nonagenarians. They have centenarians in that home. Now, I don't think anyone over 100 or even maybe in their mid-90s, yes, they will be looking at their phones. And it is, in fact, I could even say that's a problem, because then they're not interacting with the others living in their same environment. So, I mean, technology does cause us to change things, and sometimes it causes negatives. But you could say there are also a lot of positives involved too with that.
Yeah, but I think the connection between all the problems that young people are having today, as far as drug addiction, depression, alienation, and all that, pretty much comes together with the rise in cell phones and smartphones especially. And, their whole lives are now, centered around their smartphones. And less are they really communicating with each other directly. And that's probably a problem, I think.
I'll give you my final word. I do agree. I do think it's a problem. I think maybe I see it a little more globally than you do. In other words, rather than pointing directly at the smartphones or the cell phones or whatever, I think it's more of a societal issue that embraces a lot of other problems as well, including the gambling we just talked about. What to me you see with the smartphones or phones or whatever you want to call them is it reflects the transactional nature of our society. Everything is a transaction. Rather than people coming together to enjoy each other's company, to share good times or bad times, to share experiences, you're on that device that's kind of, triggering your neurons, and is incredibly transactional. Every YouTube video is preceded by an ad. It's followed by an ad. You are always getting bombarded by messages to purchase, to consume. And this is identical to TV. This is really identical to virtually everything else we do. And that is not what you would hopefully find if we did have those rec centers that I was talking about, and parks and areas that are public spaces.
I think that's a very good topic we should get into someday. The fact that everything is so over commercialized and money centered and advertising centered. It's just gotten out of control, I think.
That's very sad. You've got Arlen with Hal. It is Halitics. We've got about 15, 17 minutes more if we go the full hour, but we're making a lot of progress. We're going quickly, Arlen. If anyone wants to join us, I'd love to talk to you. 240, Arlen would love to talk to you even more than I would. 240-242-5646. Don't forget to click subscribe. I just clicked that subscribe button. Got a lovely, lovely note from a listener to the old KRXA over the weekend. Arlen telling me he really, or they, it was signed the husband and wife, how much they enjoy what I'm doing. So thank you. That made my day. Arlen,
of course, you told me about somebody else who wasn't as nice and pleasant about your show.
Oh, yes. I got hammered, and I'm glad you brought that up, Arlen. But, I don't like to, when people complain about anti-Semitism, I always say, show me the video, show me the tweet, show me the text, show me the picture. So I don't have that. This guy called me up on Facebook. In fact, he had me on speed dial through the Facebook messaging. He was very upset about my pro-Palestine, anti-Israeli posts on Facebook. And when I did answer, it was just a stream of shouted obscenities, basically F this, F you, F you, F you, Jew hater, phony, Hamas bootlicker. So that I didn't bring up before, Arlen, although it would have gone along with our discussion of can we get along. It would seem maybe we cannot.
Yeah, come to think of it, I think I paid you a little bit of money for one of our shows, and I wonder if any chance of getting a refund.
I didn't bring that up. So what Arlen's referring to is this caller was a former client of KRXA 540 and demanded, as he put it, his money back, or I want my money back. And that was when he used the phrase, I don't give money to Hamas bootlickers. I went back because I certainly remembered him. And I went back and I looked at the correspondence we'd had with respect to that agreement when he did a live stream, or not a live stream, an actual radio program. That was in 2010, Arlen. And the back and forth was very positive, where he thanked me for the opportunity and then said he, could no longer continue to do it because of the expense. And I, of course, understand that. That's fine. I mean, it was perfectly appropriate the way everything was handled, but there was no demand for money back. That just came about because he didn't like what I had to say about Palestine.
There is a good aspect to that, Al. And the fact that he knows what you're thinking now, he must be following you. So that's the good part.
He totally unfollowed me, blocked me. That's why I couldn't even play for you any of the videos or show you some of the hate tweets, because he blocked everything before I wouldn't say before, I wasn't quick enough or smart enough I didn't have the foresight to screen capture and record as I sometimes do. All right, Arlen, let's get to your blog. That is the bigpicturereport.com. You can all see it and the ID there, Arlen Grossman, pundit, thought leader, which is where he posts. And you've been centering, Arlen, if you'll forgive the expression, conservatives, but only if they're anti-Trump conservatives, as I understand it. Is that fair to say?
I'm not sure what you're saying.
You're giving voice to conservatives with whom you might otherwise disagree because they're anti-Trump.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so that was my point, which is fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just noting that the common thread is disagreement with or challenging, taking on the former president, who is, by the way, there was a CNN poll before we play Judge Ludwig here. Arlen, did you see that CNN poll has Trump up by 6 points, which I was quite surprised by. Seems to be bucking the trend, may just be an outlier, but came out over the weekend, Trump with a big lead.
Yeah, that might be an outlier, because everything I've been seeing that's very, very much tightened up, and they're pretty well tied almost everywhere.
Yeah, that was my sense too, but I just thought I'd throw that one at you, see if you had had reviewed that particular poll. All right, here's Judge. Oh, there, we got to do it a different way. I always have to. Yeah. So let me see if I can get the video here of Luttig. I hope I got it, Arlen. I remember doing Luttig, but I had the campuses boiling over. Here we go. Wow, look at this. I'm really proud of myself. I actually think I
Joining
have the
me now
video.
is the...
He's on with Ali Velshi. So
Yeah.
who is Ali Velshi exactly? I don't really know who that person is.
He's one of the MSNBC hosts, a very smart guy.
He's not so hyper partisan, is he? Or am I wrong about that?
Well, I think he's pretty much like all of them on MSNBC. They all lean to the left.
Yeah. Are any of them, and I'll play this in a second, Arlen, but is there anyone who's like to the left the way I am, where they're prepared to go after Biden and the squad for not being left enough?
They pretty much, to me at least, seem pretty much all on the same wavelength. You know, somebody else might say it differently, but to me, that's the way it looks to me anyway.
All right, let's play the video here from Velshi.
Retired former federal judge J. Michael Luttig. He previously served on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Crucially, he helped this country avoid a constitutional crisis when on January 5th, 2021, he advised then Vice President Mike Pence that he did not have the authority to not certify Joe Biden.
This guy reminds me of myself. He does awfully long introductions. All right, let's go.
Contrary to what Donald Trump was pressuring Mike Pence to do. Judge, it's good to see you this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Ali. Thank you for having me on with you this morning.
Judge, as you posted on social media after the hearing, the Supreme Court hearing, oral arguments on Thursday, one of your takeaways was that, quote, the court and the parties discussed everything but the specific question presented, end quote. I want to understand what you believe the specific question that the court should have been considering is and why it didn't succeed in addressing it.
All right, I'm going to play that in a second, or I'm going to play his response, but this was exactly what you posted. In fact, I took this off the bigpicturereport.com, and I was so frustrated by Judge Luttig's answer because I don't think he answered the damn question. It was such an easy question. And it was a direct response to his own tweet. His own tweet was they discussed everything but the specific question presented. And Velshi says, well, what is that question? And he didn't answer. At least I didn't think he did. Maybe you do, but let me play a little bit of it and then you tell me.
Ali, the Supreme Court has now fiddled while Rome is almost burned to the ground, all but trivializing the existential threat to America's democracy and the rule of law facing the country. America's democracy and the rule of law are the heart and soul of the nation. It's our democracy and rule of law that have made America the beacon of freedom for the world for almost 250 years. Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election did drive a stake through America's democracy and the rule of law. His efforts to overturn the election both disqualified him from the presidency under the 14th Amendment, and it rendered him subject to prosecution for his offenses against the United States. Yet, 3.5 years later, the former president has remained unapologetically defiant. This week, he argued, as you said, to a receptive Supreme Court.
All right, I'm going to just stop it there. I didn't hear him say the question presented is. Now, you answered that question very well when I asked it, but
I think he just did. I think he just said, it's all about January 6th and Donald Trump's, blame for that, his responsibility and accountability for it. And they're not going there. The Supreme Court's not going there. They're going, somewhere else, and they're trying to, send it back to the appeals court and just drag everything on until, there will be no more court cases that will come, to the public before the election. And, the Supreme Court is just frustrating me to no end, and a lot of other people too. They are obviously on Trump's side and doing everything they can to help him.
Well, I just want to get back to the issue that I raised, which is what is the question presented? Question presented is the what the court is considering. So if the Supreme Court, if something is brought to the Supreme Court, there's a question, and the question is, it could be anything, but generally, is this particular action constitutional? Is it protected by the Constitution? Is what the state is doing constitutional? So if a great question presented might be something to the effect of, if the Columbia protesters sued Columbia University and said, you violated our right to free speech, and that could go to the Supreme Court, the question would be, Columbia says you don't have a right to free speech on a college campus. So that would be a question presented. Do students have a right to free speech on a college campus? That would be a great question. I didn't hear a question presented there. The question, but you identified it as, does a president have immunity when they allegedly break the law to remain in power? Can they violate the law to betray a election result, to overturn or reverse a lawful election result, and not face any penalty? That seems to me a pretty clear question. But he didn't say that. That's what frustrated me so much. He didn't just simply say, can a president, reverse an election without facing any penalty for it?
Well, I think it was pretty clear that's the way he feels, and I certainly do too. What Donald Trump did on January 6th was certainly unconstitutional. He tried to overthrow an honest, fair election. He tried to get Mike Pence to nullify real electoral voters, and did everything possible to destroy and ruin the fair election that we just had in 2020.
No, I agree with that, Arlen. I think that's the case. I think that's the case against Trump. I'm not certain I believe that can be proven quite that way. But what I understand the court is grappling with is whether Trump is immune from being held criminally responsible for trying to reverse a lawful election result, right? Isn't that the question? The court Trump has argued, I'm the president. I can do whatever I want, including call people up and tell them to find votes that aren't there. I can do anything I want. I can solicit the vice president not to certify the results of an election illegally. I can do all those things, and no one can do anything to me because I'm the president. I have that presidential immunity. That's Trump's argument. So that's the question the court has to grapple with. Does the president really have immunity? And I don't think Ludwig ever said that. That's what frustrated me about that whole conversation.
Well, it's pretty well clear what he really feels. But I think, though, what bothers me the most about all of this is that the Supreme Court is obviously slowing things down, doing everything they can to help Donald Trump. And obviously, they're partisan. They want Trump to win, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that he does. They could go so much quicker and get all this out before the election, but they're not doing that. They're dragging their feet. They've shown they can go faster and quicker if they need to, but in this case, no.
I think it's a really bad thing that I'm with you on this, Arlen. It's strange to me that the court would be biased in favor of Trump. I'm not even sure they really are, but it's hard to look at the way they're handling this. Maybe they really are afraid. Let me give you a best case scenario for the court. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with this. I wouldn't think in general the court would have some sort of pro-Trump bias. I understand 3 of the justices were appointed by Trump, but certainly Gorsuch and to a lesser degree Kavanaugh do not strike me as these hyper-partisan Trump MAGA type people. Yes, Coney Barrett. Yes, Alito. Yes, Thomas. But that's just 3. I don't see that with Roberts. I don't see that with the other 2 Trump justices. So I do find it a little odd. Let me give you an argument. I'm not saying I agree with this. I believe this is the right way to look at, but maybe they do. Who's the president is a decision for the American people, not for courts to make.
I'm not sure what are you?
Well, that the court doesn't want to inject itself into this hyper political question. There's no question that's more political than who the president is, right? It's for the people to decide. It's a pure political. It's a question it's a question for democracy, and so the court doesn't want to substitute its judgment for that of the American people.
I would disagree with you vehemently about the fact that you said not all of them don't want Trump to be president, because I think if they voted, I'd say I'd be pretty confident that 6 of those judges are conservative Republicans and they would vote for Trump rather than Biden. And they're certainly displaying that, I think.
But Arlen, though, Liz Cheney's a conservative Republican and she's not for Trump. I don't know that his vice president, Mike Pence, supports. I would posit he's not for Trump, and he's a conservative Republican. There are lots of conservative Republicans who don't like Trump.
But they're not the ones on the Supreme Court, from what I can tell. I don't see any indication that any of them are anything like Liz Cheney or, anybody that's, a little bit more anti-Trump. I think they've given every indication that they want Trump to win.
Okay. Well, okay. I mean, that may be true. I don't really dispute that specific point. I just find it a little strange because the Republicans who have been least supportive of Trump in some ways mirror some of the justices. Certainly Roberts, he was a W appointee. The Bushes and the Trumps do not get along. They don't have any kind of a relationship that's positive. And again, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are kind of center right, not hard right Republicans. So I don't quite share your view that the court would necessarily, except for Alito, Thomas, and Coney Barrett. So I'm not saying that they don't support Trump, but it wouldn't just seem to me obvious that they would support Trump. And I'm trying to think of other reasons they might be looking to delay. I mean, it is a big deal to hold a former president in the dock criminally.
Yeah, and this stuff should be decided by the people having all the evidence and knowing the results. But that's not going to happen because the Supreme Court and other judges are delaying this, putting everything off, and the American people are not going to be able to get all the answers that they deserve before casting their votes in November.
Well, I think that's a good point. I do. I mean, this is a very serious crisis we went through on January 6th and 21, and we'd like to have more information. But we have a lot of information. I don't know how much more is going to come out in court, but and certainly the American people will bear it in mind when they vote. They may not vote the way you would like them to. I don't really care, to be honest with you.
I do.
Here's a conservative Republican who feels the same way you do, Arlen. So tell us about Liz Cheney.
Well, Liz Cheney, as we know, was on the Senate or the congressional panel that investigated January 6th, and she was very strong and had very strong views, and she knew that what happened by the things that Trump did were illegal and wrong, and she's just continuing on trying to get that view across. And she, like many of us, is afraid that the Supreme Court is not doing their job as far as getting these cases to court before the election. And it's not just January 6th. There's the Mar-a-Lago documents, official documents trial. There's the Georgia trial. I mean, there's all these court cases that are not going to happen other than just the one we have right now, and some of the ones that involve money in New York.
Well, I agree with you. I wish that Georgia trial were going forward, because to me, that's the strongest case against Trump that I've read about. And I mean, I think they've got a very, very powerful case that I would like to see.
The one with the official documents is pretty solid too. I think it's pretty obvious.
It's less troubling to me. Not that it's okay, but to me, the worst thing that Trump did was when he tried to arm twist the Georgia officials to not to certify the vote that he lost. That to me was an absolute violation of democracy, the worst. So that's why I'd like to see that brought out. And unfortunately, you did have prosecutorial misconduct. I don't think it prejudiced Trump, but he's certainly playing that for all it's worth. Just let me show you what, because to be fair, Liz Cheney and you share a lot, but you don't agree on everything. For example, I don't think she thinks that the court is so pro-Trump as you do. She writes, it is likely that all or nearly all of the justices will agree that a former president who attempted to seize power and remain in office illegally can be prosecuted. And that's the question presented, right? That is the question presented. Can the former president be prosecuted for doing that? Obviously, I have my problems with the Cheney family, very, very serious ones. I may think they're evil. I don't think they're stupid. She did a nice job with this op-ed. But she makes the point, Arlen, the profoundly negative impact that will result if the court doesn't issue a decision quickly and decisively. And I think that's your point too, right? That dithering, delaying, drawing this out is very harmful to our country.
Yeah, the American people deserve, all the evidence out there. They should know, everything that went on and be able to make an informed choice. But if they, have to wait and not have these things happen before the election, then the American people are not getting everything they need.
It goes to an interesting question, because oftentimes there's a debate, right? When you get those so-called October surprises, the side that is negatively impacted by it, says this is all partisan gamesmanship. They bring it out at the worst possible moment just to hurt us. And the other side will say, well, no, this is really important. The American people need to know. In this case, though, the information has been out for quite a while. And it does seem as though the court itself is delaying, bringing it closer and closer to the election time, which, again, I share your view, Arlen. I'd love to see all this stuff addressed.
And I've seen polls that are saying that a lot of people's votes would change and be different if Trump was convicted of felonies. And, so that's something that I think is important to think about.
Well, do you think anybody's vote was changed when the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller, concluded that there was no case to be made in court against Trump for Russiagate? Do you think that changed anyone's? Because I haven't seen anyone who said, oh, yeah, you know what? Now that Mueller said, I know Rachel kept saying we finally got him and he's Trump's on the run and Trump's running scared. The dominoes are all falling on Trump. And then in the end, none of them fell on Trump as a result of Russiagate. I didn't hear anybody say, yeah, you know what? Maybe Trump isn't so bad. So I don't know that him being convicted is really going to change a lot of people's minds either.
Well, the whole Mueller thing just disturbs me to no end. That was done so poorly. Mueller did that poorly. And then you got Bill Barr interfering and giving his interpretation before anybody else had a chance to see all the evidence. That was just a mess.
So when the prosecutor doesn't charge Trump, you blame the prosecutor, but you think that Trump supporters, I'm just trying to see, playing both sides. So you blame, I'm not saying maybe you're right. I don't agree with you. I don't think the evidence for Russiagate was strong at all, but okay. I think the evidence is strong that he conspired to defraud the American people. That's why I think the Georgia case is so powerful, and I think he should stand trial for that. But you're saying that your mind wasn't changed when one prosecution against Trump failed, but you think other people's minds will be changed if there's a successful prosecution against Trump.
Well, I certainly hope so. There are independents out there. There are Republicans who are not totally MAGA. And, And all, they just, if they could get less than half, less than the majority, then that'll help Biden. And then that's what I want to see happen.
Final thoughts, Arlen. I referenced, I'm not going to show the poll, but, and then I'll give you your last word, but final question, really. I referenced that CNN poll that showed Trump up, that came out over the weekend, showed him up by 6 points. And when you include the third and fourth and fifth party candidates, Dr. West, Jill Stein, who, by the way, is also a doctor, Robert Kennedy, when you include all of them, Trump's lead goes up to about 9 points, which is kind of interesting because you'd think, well, Cornel West and Jill Stein would be more likely to draw votes away from Biden. But in fact, well, that's what you would think, right? But people are saying that Kennedy could hurt Trump, and apparently he's not, at least in that poll. Does that surprise you?
It's pretty hard to tell exactly what really is going on, whether Robert Kennedy is going to help Trump or hurt Trump. He's just going to complicate things. That we can see. I was disturbed that Bill Maher actually had Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a guest on his show and seemed to be, have some sympathy toward RFK Jr. And I was kind of surprised at that. But, all these other candidates, I wish were not there. But we have such a strange electoral system that they can be on the ballot. And, it makes things very confusing. And nobody really knows, especially at this time before, months before November, we just don't know the answers to many of the questions you just asked.
All right, let me give you a quick analysis, my off-the-cuff thought, hypothesis, and I want your reaction to it, and then we'll give you the final word, Arlen. The fact that if let me put it this way, if indeed these three add-on candidates, Kennedy, West, and Stein, are drawing support from Biden disproportionately rather than from Trump, what that tells me is that the support for Biden remains soft, that Democrats, left-leaning people, hard left people, centrists who might lean towards Biden don't love Biden. They don't feel strongly about Biden. He is, not their first choice. Trump is not a lot of people's first choice either, but for those who are going to vote for him, they are going to vote for him.
Yeah, you're right. And that is a big issue. I don't think the support for Biden is real strong, and he's got to, he's got to give people a reason to get to the polls and vote for him. And so far he hasn't done a good enough job. And I hope that they can figure out a way to, make it happen. But so far, not yet.
All right, on this Arlen Monday, Arlen, final thoughts, words, ideas, anything that jumped into your mind while we were talking that maybe you didn't get to spew?
Well, I think we covered a lot of stuff today, a lot of topics, and so I'm quite happy that we got them all in and we expressed our opinions. So I think we did well.
All right, you hear the music coming up. Arlen, thank you so much. It was great having you on. Made my life a lot easier with your great stories to cover. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk more about campus protests, maybe with a campus protester.
Good.